For the crocus leaves, you will need your transparent green seed beads, the opaque lime green rainbow seed beads, 24 gauge green colored copper core wire, 30 gauge green copper core wire. You'll need a ruler and wire cutters. And I'm going to show you guys how to use one of these little spool tamers. Now, the point of a spool tamer is to prevent your wire spool from kind of exploding and making a bit of a mess and getting all tangled around itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to just spool out a little bit of the wire, and you'll want to hold onto the wire as you're spooling it out. Some colors, as you kind of undo the wire from the little notch or however it's being held on, some of the wires tend to kind of spring and explode, especially the gold. So be careful with that gold. It tends to be kind of a pain in the rear. So carefully open it up and kind of hold the end down so it doesn't spring all over the place on you. And the little spool tamer has a plastic piece in the middle of the band with a little hole in it. You're going to stick the end of your wire to the inside of that little hole, so it goes through, and then kind of stretch the band so it fits around your spool like this. Now you should be able to adjust the band to make it as tight or not tight as you like. And then you can pull out as much wire as you need to work with, and the rest of your spool stays nice and tidy. So these are great. I work with these all the time. If you can find them somewhere, they're just wonderful to have on hand. Before we get started with the demo, I want to take a look at the pattern, the written instructions here, because it is important in French beading to be able to read these patterns. Not every pattern comes with the video instructions. So I'm going to show you guys how to read these patterns. As you can see, there are 3 different leaf sizes. There's a small, a medium, and a large. And the instructions say that we're going to make 1 for each flower. So if you have an arrangement with 6 flowers, you'll make 6 small leaves, and then so on for the other leaves as well. Now let's look at the large leaf pattern, because that's the one that I'm going to make here on screen. We've got a 3-row basic frame. BF is basic frame. We have a 4-inch basic row. We're going to be wrapping pointed bottom, pointed top. So that means we're going to be using a 45-degree angle wrap to make a point on both ends of the leaf. And then right here it kind of describes our shading pattern. Our basic row is going to be the lime green. And then the second and third rows around the outside are going to be the regular transparent green. We need to lace our large leaf 2 to 3 times. I'm going to do 3. And then we're going to be reducing to 2 bottom wires. So you can take what you learned from there and kind of, it's mostly the same for all the leaves. We have different numbers of lacing wires, and then the length of the basic row changes. So pay attention to that as you're reading through these patterns. I'm just going to demonstrate the large leaf here on camera. It's the same basic process for all the leaves. Again, the only difference is the number of lacing wires and the length of the basic row. We're going to start off by stringing the transparent green directly onto the spool, and we're going to leave the wire attached to our spool while we're working. And then we just need to string the light green when we're setting up the basic frame. Now, I have 2 bead spinners, so I'm going to use 2 bead spinners. But if you just have one, I would put the transparent green in your spinner first and string as much of that as you can. If you look at the PDF, grab that. If you look at this little PDF here, there's part of the instructions that tell you about how many inches of this transparent green that you need to string for each of the different leaf sizes. So about 6.5 inches for a small leaf, about 7.5 inches for a medium leaf, and about 8.5 inches for a large leaf. So you can use that to kind of calculate how much you need to string if you just have the 1 bead spinner. And you can dump back and forth if you need to, because stringing 10 feet of beads kind of sucks. It's not very pleasant and your wire gets all tangled and everything. So you can string just a few feet and then switch back and forth with your colors there. Alright, so I've already got some beads strung onto my 24 gauge copper core wire. I'm going to now string the beads that I need for my basic row, which is going to be made in the lime green. Now the large leaf has a basic row of about 4 inches long. So I need 4 inches of these lime green beads right at the end of my wire. Make sure that you're straightening out your beads while you're measuring them so you get an accurate measurement. And I do that just by running, kind of pushing my thumb into the beads to kind of straighten out any lumps. Alright, so my basic row is going to be there, and I'm going to make a little loop in the very end of my wire so that my beads don't fall off. We're going to set up our basic frame here. We're going to grab all of those light green beads and we're going to push them to about 1/2 inch away from the end of the wire. So we're only wrapping 2 more rows around that, so we don't really need a very long top wire. Alright, now I'm going to grab some wire down below, bare wire. About 4 inches worth of wire there. And then we're going to fold it in half, kind of making a loop right there below the basic row. I'm going to grab and pinch the basic row of beads and then also the long end of my wire right there below those beads to make a little loop, and then I'm going to twist those wires together just like that. Now you should end up with something that looks kind of like this. We've got our basic row right here in the middle. This is row number 1 when you're counting your rows. And then we've got our working wire, which should be attached just below your basic row. That one is going to be strung with the darker green beads that we're going to be using for the second and third rows. Above this basic row is the top wire. And then the twisted wire below the basic row is the bottom wire. And then this is our bottom loop. Alright, now before I get started, I'm actually going to cut some little lacing wires here. Now I'm going to be cutting, you only really need about 2 inches worth of wire. And I'm going to cut 3 of those. Again, this is my 30 gauge wire. So about 3 2-inch wires there for the large leaf because I'm going to be lacing 3 times. I just like to prep my lacing wires before I start wrapping rows because it's a little bit easier. So I've got my 3 little wires and I'm going to fold them in half so that they're ready to go when I'm ready to add them to my leaf. Alright, now my basic row here is a little bit wonky, so I'm going to take some time, and again I'm going to kind of straighten it out just by running my finger and kind of pushing my finger into it to try and get out all of those little wiggles. I'm going to do the same thing with the beads on my working wire. I want to straighten out that wire because that's going to make it easier for, especially with these longer leaves, if you have your beads nice and straight. Alright, now what I'm going to do here is I want to make sure that this row of beads is kind of situated below the basic row. Right now it's a little bit above them, so I'm just going to push the basic row up a little bit and then push those dark green beads down, and then I can move my basic row back down. That way that row is starting out below the basic row. Alright, now measuring out this first row of beads on a very long leaf like this is a little bit tricky to do. You need to keep this basic row nice and straight. You might need to pull on it a little bit. We're going to do the same thing with the working wire. Kind of pull on it, make sure it's nice and straight, and then pull it up directly beside that basic row, and I'm going to kind of grab that top wire with my finger. Then I use my other hand to kind of inch my way up, making sure that everything is nice and lined up and even. Nothing is bent out of place. Move up to the top, and then kind of grab right there at the top of your rows so that what you've measured doesn't switch. Now we're going to be wrapping a pointed top, and that means we're going to cross our working wire over the front of that top wire at a 45-degree angle. Now what I do is I use my finger as a wedge. I'm not really pushing down on my wire, and I'm not pushing on this wire either. It's mostly just bracing against those wires. This is going to help me to hold tension and help to keep my 45-degree angle while I'm wrapping. So again, it's just a brace there. I'm pulling tightly on this working wire, and I'm going to wrap around. I'm going to make sure that I'm maintaining that 45-degree angle the whole time that I'm wrapping around. And then cross down over the front and bring my wire down at a 45-degree angle, like that. I'm going to show you another way to do that, how most people do it. That's my way of doing things, but I'll show you another way here once we get down to the bottom. All right, now I'm going to stop here and I'm going to add in my lacing wires. You can continue going if you want to. If you're pretty comfortable and just want to go ahead and wrap that last row of beads, you can. I'm going to add the lacing wires in here now because it does make it just a little bit easier to make that last row of beads. So I've got these 3 little lacing wires and I'm going to place them so that they divide the basic row into 4 pieces. Now I've got a 4-inch basic row, and that means that I'm going to be placing a lacing wire every inch. So I'm going to start right about there is where I need my first lacing wire. So I'm going to be inserting this little folded wire into the front so that there is an end of the wire on each side of the basic row. I'm going to pull it so that little fold in the center catches around a bead on the front of my basic row, and then I'll have 2 little wires sticking out of the back. Now, looking at the back side, I'm going to cross these 2 wires so they switch places. So I'm just going to hold this here and then cross my wires. That's going to make a little loop around that basic row. And then I'm going to go ahead and lace row 2. I just flipped my little leaf over there because it's a little bit easier for me to work with my right hand. So I've switched it so I can more easily access that lacing wire with my right hand. Now we should bring the lacing wire around the back of row 2, those dark green beads, around the back, and then we're going to loop over the front, right in between row 2 and the basic row. That way I can make a full loop around row 2 right there with that lacing wire. All right, so there's the first lacing wire attached, and now we're going to add in the next one. And it's going to be 1 inch down. So again, I'm going to measure about 1 inch. It doesn't need to be perfect. I put my first one up a little bit too far, so I'm going to go a little bit down right there. All right, so I'm going to insert that lacing wire same way I did the first one, just looping right around that basic row, pull to the back, and cross the wires. And then again, I'm going to lace in row 2. And you'll want to kind of make sure that everything is straight before you go too far here. Now, as you're lacing, you do want your lacing wire to go somewhat straight across. We don't want to have it leaning too much. Now, you can't always get it perfect, but do try to get it somewhere close to being straight across your beads. So I just kind of mark with my thumbnail right where I want those wires to go. See if I can scooch in. Alright, so I'm kind of marking there with my thumbnail right between where I want the lacing wire to go. I'm going to pull that around, make sure I'm looping around row 2. I went around the back, looping over the front, and I want to make sure that lacing wire goes all the way down between 2 beads in that row. Now I've got 1 more lacing wire to add. And this one's going to go about 1 inch down. I'm just going to eyeball it this time, but you can measure. And again, we're going to cross the wires over the back of the leaf. Now, if you ever get confused as to which is the back side of your leaf, if you flip it over, you'll see the wire wrap on the back there, this little loop of wire right there on the back. If you flip it over to the front, for now you're going to see it, but on the front, that's going to be covered with beads. So that's how you can decide which side is your back, is that the back has a little wire wrap there and the front does not. Alright, so again I'm going to bring that lacing wire around the back of row 2 and loop around. Alright, now I'm actually going to double wrap these because that is the last row of beads on this side, and that's going to secure our lacing wires. So I'm just going to loop around again. Going to secure the end of the lacing wires on that side of our leaf. So I've double wrapped those lacing wires on that side, and now I'm ready to do row 3, which is going to go down to the bottom wire right below our basic row. So what I'm going to do here is, as I'm making row 3, I'm going to line it up beside the leaf, kind of pinch and hold it in place. And then before I even go all the way down, I'm going to stop right there at that lacing wire, pinch and hold it together with those previous rows of beads so they don't come apart. And I'm going to lace that little spot right there. I'm going to double wrap because this is the last row on this side of the leaf. Double wrap that lacing wire, and then I'm going to scooch down, straighten out your basic frame. Sometimes the easiest way to do that is to kind of grab the bottom and grab the top and kind of pull in opposite directions, and sometimes if you wiggle back and forth it helps as well. But you can also just kind of mold with your fingers to try to straighten everything out. Alright, so I'm going to measure the next row of beads. Make sure that you're pushing up on these rows of beads to make sure that you don't end up with gaps like this between any of your beads in your row. So make sure that you're pushing up, and you want to make sure that lacing wire is going behind the row. Pinch and hold that row in place, and then we're going to double wrap this lacing wire. Now my lacing wires are pretty short here. If you need to, you can use pliers to help you to grab and loop around these little tiny wires. And then we're going to do the same thing down the next lacing wire. So kind of mold the row nice and straight and then move down. Your rows should be directly beside each other, not with any gaps between them. Pinch and hold that in place. Mark with my thumbnail kind of right between the beads where I want the wire to go. And then we're going to double wrap this little lacing wire right around row 3. Alright, now we're down at the bottom wire. Let me show you another way to do that 45-degree angle wrap. So we're going to measure out our beads so that they are either right on top of or directly in front of that bottom wire. We're going to cross over at a 45-degree angle. Pinch and hold that row in place just like I did before. That just gives you a little bit more control over the situation. Cross over at a 45-degree angle, wrap around the back, and then come up at a 45-degree angle. What you'll notice with a 45-degree angle wrap is that there is a little bit of a gap between the two halves of your wrap. So right below this lower wire that's in your wrap and the upper wire, there should be a little bit of a gap. That's exactly what you need for a 45-degree angle wrap. And there is one also when I do mine as well. But that's how you can check whether your wrap is going to help you to make a 45-degree angle wrap or not. Then we're going to push bead, well, this is the last row of beads, so we don't actually need any more rows of beads on our little leaf here, but if you were to continue with the rows, you'd push beads down and then fold them down the side like that to finish off your 45-degree angle wrap. But this is our last row of beads, so instead of doing that, we're just going to double wrap our working wire right there below where we've done our last row of beads. And we are reducing to 2 bottom wires. That means that we're going to be removing this working wire off of the leaf. So I'm just going to clip that right against that little stem wire there at the bottom. And for this wire that's still attached to my spool, I'm going to put a little loop in it so that my beads don't fall off. Alright, now we're going to go through and finish off all these other little wires. To finish off the top wire, we're going to cut it short to about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch there, and then fold it to the back side of your leaf. Alright, now all these little lacing wires, I'm going to flip my leaf over. Now this is the only side that your lacing wires should show on. It's not going to show very well here on camera because I used a matching color of wire, but there should be a wire kind of crossing over between the rows, but you shouldn't see that on the front side of your leaf. Alright, now to trim off these little lacing wires, what I do is I put my little wire cutter right flat against the back of my leaf and then trim the lacing wire. And do that to all of them. And don't trim them until you've double wrapped. So if you haven't double wrapped yet, make sure that those lacing wires are double wrapped first. Because otherwise those lacing wires might come undone pretty easily. Now if you have any little, if you run your finger over it and you feel any like little tabs of wire sticking up, you can just kind of tuck those down. I just use my fingernail, but you can use pliers if you'd like. Tuck those little wire ends down. And then when you run your finger over the back, you shouldn't feel any of those little pokes of wire. Now we're also going to open up the bottom loop. Now you want a few twists in your bottom wire right below your leaf. That's just going to give you a little bit more grip while you're assembling, but also it adds a little bit more strength to your leaf as well, a little bit more support. Now I'm going to cut over off to the side to open up that bottom loop. And then my wires end up different lengths. And I am done with my leaf. Alright, so I made the large leaf there on camera. There are two other leaf sizes. The medium leaf has a 3.5 inch long basic row, and this small leaf has a 3 inch long basic row.